A man walks into Australia's highest office carrying two things that should never fit in the same hands: the instincts of a union, man and the mandate of conservatives. He will be called a traitor by old comrades, a savior by new allies, and, most dangerously, safe by people who don't notice the fuse already burning. And the clock is already ticking, because his body will not give him the decades most leaders assume they're owed. Before the nation ever learns his name, Joseph Lyons is already racing time, hunger, and a system built to keep boys like him small. He begins in a place that feels like the edge of the world, Stanley, on Tasmania's northwest coast, where the wind comes off Bass, straight like a warning, and the sea can look like iron. Joseph Aloysius Lyons is born on 15th of September 1879 into a large Irish Catholic family. His father, Michael, is a laborer. Work is physical, money is thin, and security is a rumor. In a household like this, childhood is not a protected garden, it's a training ground. You learn early what it means when the pantry is quiet. You learn the sound of boots that have to last another season. You learn that the world does not bend for you just because you are tired. Then the first hard twist. His father dies when Joseph is still young. The family's center of gravity collapses. His mother, Ellen, holds the household together with the kind of endurance that doesn't get statues. For Joseph, the loss is not only grief, it's a deadline. Childhood ends early. The future becomes a calculation: how to earn, how to rise, how to avoid being swallowed by the same poverty that took so many around him. School becomes his escape route, but not in a romantic way. It's not follow your dreams. It's survive. He is bright, disciplined, and, crucially, able to speak in a way that makes people listen. In small communities, words are currency. A boy who can explain, persuade, and calm a room has a kind of power that doesn't require money. He trains that power quietly, like someone sharpening a blade in the dark. He becomes a teacher, not because it's glamorous, but because it's stable, respected, and, most important, portable. Teaching takes him into the machinery of society: families, wages, illness, the way a bad season can turn into a bad decade. He sees children arriving hungry, and he understands that education is not just books. It's breakfast, boots, and the dignity of not being treated as disposable. The classroom is where he learns the first rule of politics. People don't live in theories. They live in rent, bread, and fear. By the early 1900s, Tasmania is not a gentle place for reformers. The island's economy is tight, its opportunities narrower than the sea that surrounds it. But Lyons is not built for resignation. He moves through the education system, becomes active in teachers' organizations, and begins to develop a public voice. He is not the kind of man who storms platforms with theatrical rage. His weapon is something more unsettling: calm insistence. He can sound reasonable while saying things that threaten the comfortable. And then comes the second twist, one that will define the rest of his life. He steps into labor politics. In 1909, Joseph Lyons is elected to the Tasmanian House of Assembly as a member of the Labour Party. It's a leap from chalk dust to power, from classroom discipline to parliamentary combat. But he doesn't arrive as an outsider. He arrives as someone who has lived the consequences of policy. He knows what it means when wages fail, when work disappears, when a family's luck runs out. He carries that knowledge like a bruise you can't see. Tasmanian politics at the time is a rough arena: shifting alliances, fragile majorities, and the constant pressure of economic reality. Lyons rises quickly, not by flamboyance but by reliability. He becomes a minister in the Tasmanian government, first in roles tied to education and public administration. He pushes for reforms that reflect his roots: better schooling, stronger public services, a state that does not abandon people to chance. He is building a reputation as a practical reformer, a man who can make government function rather than merely argue about it. But the world is about to change in a way that makes local politics feel like a small boat in a storm. The First World War arrives, and with it the conscription crisis that tears Australia's labor movement apart. The nation argues about whether men should be compelled to fight overseas. The debate is not abstract. It's about sons, husbands, brothers, about who gets to decide what a life is worth. The Labour Party fractures. Friendships break. Communities split. Lyons, a Catholic and a Labour man, moves through this period with caution and conviction, watching how quickly moral certainty can become political shrapnel. He learns another rule: in politics, the most dangerous battles are the ones fought inside your own side. After the war, he continues to climb. In 1916, he becomes Premier of Tasmania, still a relatively young man, carrying the weight of an entire state on his shoulders. Imagine the visual. A former teacher from a poor coastal town now sitting at the head of government, signing documents that decide budgets, jobs, and futures. It's the kind of rise that looks inevitable only after it happens. At the time, it's precarious. Every decision can be used against you. Every compromise can be called betrayal. As premier, Lyons is not a revolutionary. He is a builder. He believes in government as a tool, imperfect but necessary. He tries to steady Tasmania through post-war pressures, industrial tensions, and the constant challenge of limited resources. He is also learning how power really works, not as speeches, but as negotiations, trade-offs, and the slow grind of administration. The romance of politics dies quickly in the face of payrolls and public works. Lyons adapts. He becomes tougher, more controlled, more strategic. And then, in the middle of this public ascent, comes a personal partnership that will become one of the most remarkable political marriages in Australian history. Joseph meets Enid Burnell, a young woman with sharp intelligence and a fierce sense of purpose. They marry in 1915. Their home will not be quiet. It will be full, crowded with children, responsibilities, and the constant hum of public life. They will have 12 children. 12. In an era without modern conveniences, without the safety nets people take for granted, that number is not a statistic. It's a daily logistical battle. It means sleepless nights, endless expenses, and a household that runs like a small institution. Enid is not a decorative spouse. She is politically aware, socially active, and later will become a public figure in her own right. Their partnership adds a new dimension to Lyons. He is not only a politician, he is a family man in the most literal, exhausting sense. The image becomes part of his public identity. Honest Joe, the approachable leader, the man who understands ordinary life because he is living it at scale. But family also tightens the time limit. Every crisis is not just a headline, it's a threat to a household of 14. Every political gamble risks not only his career, but the stability of a large family depending on him. The pressure is constant, and it shapes his instincts. Caution, pragmatism, a preference for stability over spectacle. By the early 1920s, Lyons has become one of the most prominent labor figures in Tasmania. Yet Tasmania is small, and the national stage is calling. The Commonwealth Parliament in Canberra is where the big decisions are made. Tariffs, budgets, national development, the shape of Australia's future. Lyons understands that if you want to change the country, you can't stay on the island forever. In 1929, he makes the jump to federal politics. He is elected to the House of Representatives for the seat of Wilmot as a Labour member. It should feel like a triumph. Tasmania's former premier arriving in the national parliament. But the timing is almost cruel, because 1929 is not just an election year. It is the year the world economy begins to collapse. The Great Depression is not a single event. It's a spreading darkness. Factories slow, then stop. Men line up for work that doesn't exist. Families ration food. Pride becomes a luxury. In Australia, unemployment surges, and the political system begins to shake under the weight of desperation. Governments fall. Parties split. The public mood turns sharp and unforgiving. Labour wins the 1929 federal election under James Scullin, and Lyons is appointed Postmaster General and Minister for Works and Railways. These are not ceremonial roles. Communications and infrastructure are arteries of a nation, especially in crisis. But almost immediately, the government is trapped between competing demands. Relief for the unemployed, pressure from financial institutions, the constraints of international credit, and the brutal arithmetic of budgets collapsing as revenue dries up. Here, the central conflict begins to form like a crack in glass. Lyons is a labor man who believes in helping ordinary people, but he is also a man who fears financial chaos, who believes that if government loses control of its credit and spending, the suffering will become even worse. Inside the Labour Party, the argument becomes a civil war. Should Australia pursue deflation and balance budgets, or should it expand credit and spending to fight unemployment? It's not just policy, it's ideology, identity, and survival. Lyons is pulled toward the orthodox side, toward fiscal restraint, toward plans that aim to restore confidence, even if it means harsh measures. Many in Labour see this as surrender to bankers and conservative interests. Others see it as the only way to keep the nation from spiraling into complete collapse. The tension is not theoretical for Lyons. He can picture the faces of families like his own. He can imagine what happens if the currency breaks, if savings vanish, if imports become unaffordable. He is trying to choose between two kinds of pain, and both choices will make enemies. And the enemies are not across the aisle. They are sitting beside him. As the Scullin government struggles, Lyons becomes acting treasurer at a critical moment, stepping into the most dangerous portfolio in the country. The treasurer in a depression is not a minister. He is a lightning rod. Every cut is a betrayal. Every tax is an outrage. Every loan negotiation is a humiliation. Lyons is now at the center of a storm that will not spare reputations. The pressure builds. Cabinet meetings become battlegrounds. The Labor caucus becomes a room full of clenched jaws. Outside Parliament, people are hungry, angry, frightened. Inside, the party is tearing itself apart over how to respond. Lyons, once the steady builder, is now forced into a role where steadiness looks like cruelty to some and weakness to others. And then the moment arrives when the story stops being about policy and becomes about identity. Lyons begins to break with his party's dominant direction. He cannot accept what he sees as reckless financial proposals. Others cannot accept what they see as his abandonment of labor principles. The word traitor starts to hover in the air, not yet shouted but close. The man who rose from poverty, who taught children, who built his career inside labor, is now facing the most brutal kind of opposition. The kind that comes from people who once called you comrade. He is running out of room. He is running out of time. And he can feel it, because politics is not only about votes. It's about the moment when you realize the bridge behind you is burning and the road ahead is fog. By the end of 1930, the split is no longer a possibility. It is a gravitational pull. Lyons and others who share his view begin to separate from the official labor line. The decision is not made with joy. It is made with the cold awareness that once you step over that line, you can never go back. Your old allies will rewrite your story. Your motives will be questioned. Your past will be used as a weapon. And yet Lyons steps closer to the edge anyway, because he believes the country is sliding toward disaster, and because he believes his duty is not to a faction, but to the survival of the nation as he understands it. The former teacher from Stanley, the Premier of Tasmania, the labor minister in a collapsing economy, is now approaching the most dangerous transformation of his life. The next move will either destroy him or remake him into something Australia has never seen. A leader forged in contradiction, carrying the scars of one political family while walking into the arms of another, and the fuse keeps burning. He doesn't storm out with a clenched fist. He walks out with a ledger in his head and a knife in his back. Picture the scene. A labor man, raised on scarcity, shaped by unions, elected by working people, standing in the middle of the Great Depression and being told by his own side that the only way to save the country is to do what he believes will break it. And if he refuses, he's not merely wrong. He's a traitor, the kind you don't forgive, the kind you erase. Joseph Lyons has spent his whole life learning how to keep a room calm. Now the room is Australia, and it's on fire. The Scullin government is collapsing under the weight of unemployment, falling revenue, and the brutal reality that Australia's finances are tied to overseas lenders in a global panic. Every week brings new numbers that feel like body counts. Men queue for bread, families sell furniture, children go to school with empty stomachs and learn to be quiet about it. In Parliament, the arguments are no longer about what's ideal. They're about what fails first: the budget, the banks, or the people. Inside labor, the split hardens into two competing visions of survival. One side demands expansion of credit, more spending, a refusal to let orthodoxy strangle the nation. The other side, Lyons among them, believes that if Australia loses financial credibility, the crash will deepen into something worse. A currency crisis, a collapse of imports, savings wiped out, wages turned into paper. Lyons isn't defending bankers out of love. He's defending the idea that if the floor gives way, it won't be the wealthy who hit first. It will be families like his. But politics doesn't reward nuance in a panic. It rewards certainty. And certainty is exactly what Lyons cannot fake. By early 1931, the government is tearing itself apart in public. The Premier's plan, an agreement pushed to stabilize finances through spending cuts, wage reductions, and increased taxes, becomes the symbol of everything people fear. To supporters, it's bitter medicine. To opponents, it's surrender. Lyons backs it. Not because he enjoys austerity, but because he believes the alternative is national insolvency and chaos. He is choosing between two nightmares, and he chooses the one he thinks the country can survive. That choice detonates his relationship with the labor movement. The attacks aren't polite, they're personal. The man who once spoke for workers is now accused of doing the work of conservatives. The word rat begins to circle, Australia's ugliest political insult for a defector. It's not just a label, it's a social death sentence. It means your old friends won't shake your hand. It means your motives are assumed corrupt. It means your entire past is rewritten as a con. And Lyons feels the time pressure in a way the public can't see. He is not a young firebrand with decades to recover from a mistake. He is a father of 12, carrying the stress of a nation and a household at once. The strain shows in his health, fatigue, the constant grind of crisis, the sense that every day is a fight against both the economy and his own body. He can't afford a long exile in the political wilderness. If he's going to jump, he has to land on something solid, fast. Then comes the moment that turns a crack into a chasm. In March 1931, Lyons and a group of like-minded Labour members break away. They become the nucleus of what will be called the United Australia Party, an alliance that draws in anti-Labour forces, including the nationalists, and sells itself as the adult in the room. Stability, confidence, recovery. It is a political reinvention so dramatic it feels like a magic trick performed with a live audience. One day he's a Labour minister. The next he's the man conservatives are willing to follow. And the twist is that many of them don't even like him. To parts of the conservative establishment, Lyons is still a Catholic, still an ex-union man, still someone with Labour instincts. They don't trust his heart. They trust his usefulness. They see him as a bridge to voters they can't reach on their own. Lyons knows this. He can feel the calculation in the handshakes. But he also knows something else. In a depression, the public doesn't vote for your purity. They vote for the person who looks like they can stop the bleeding. The Scullin government limps on, then breaks. Another Labour split, this time with the radical wing led by Jack Lang, shatters any remaining unity. The country watches its leaders argue while the queues grow longer. The atmosphere becomes poisonous. Newspapers screaming, crowds heckling, Parliament snarling. Australia is not just broke, it's furious. An election is coming, and it feels less like a contest than a verdict. Lyons steps into the campaign as leader of the United Australia Party, and the contrast is almost cinematic. James Scullin looks exhausted, trapped between factions. Lyons looks like the neighbor who might actually fix the fence. He speaks softly, sells steadiness, and lets the chaos of his opponents do half his work. His image, Honest Joe, isn't an accident. It's a weapon. In a time when people suspect everyone is lying, he offers the performance of plainness, the careful phrasing, the modest tone, the family man aura. Behind it is steel. The election of December 1931 is decisive. Labour is smashed. Lyons wins, and with it comes the strangest transformation in Australian politics. A man who began as a Labour reformer becomes Prime Minister at the head of a conservative-dominated coalition. The country doesn't just change governments. It changes the story it tells itself about who can lead. Now the real test begins, because winning power in a depression is like inheriting a house already burning. The public expects miracles. The Treasury offers arithmetic. Lyons takes office with promises of stability, but stability is not a switch you flip. It's a war you fight in slow motion. He forms government and immediately faces the central contradiction of his new life. The people who put him there want different things. Business interests want confidence and balanced budgets. Working families want jobs and relief. Farmers want prices and protection. States want money. The Commonwealth wants control. Everyone wants the pain to stop, and everyone wants someone else to pay for it. Lyons chooses a path that is cautious, incremental, and politically dangerous. Maintain financial orthodoxy, restore confidence, and wait for recovery, while trying to soften the worst edges without blowing up the budget. It is not the kind of plan that makes crowds cheer. It is the kind of plan that survives. But survival has a cost. Cuts and restraint mean real suffering continues. Unemployment remains high. For many Australians, recovery is a word they hear on the radio while they count coins at the kitchen table. Lyons becomes the face of a government that asks for patience from people who have already run out of it. And still he keeps going, because he believes the alternative is worse, and because he has no safe way back. Labour will not take him home. Conservatives will not fully embrace him. He is Prime Minister, but he is also a man without a tribe, balancing on a narrow beam over a furious crowd. Then the next shock arrives. The world begins to tilt again, and the depression story starts to merge with something darker. Across the oceans, authoritarianism is rising. Japan pushes outward in Asia. Germany rearms under Hitler. Italy marches under Mussolini. The headlines are no longer just about prices and unemployment. They're about aggression, treaties, and the possibility that the last war was not the war to end war at all, just an intermission. Lyons, who came to power selling calm, now has to look at defense and foreign policy with a country still traumatized by the First World War and still broke from the Depression. Rearmament costs money. Not rearming may cost lives. And every pound spent on ships and planes is a pound not spent on relief. It's another impossible choice, and once again, he is the man choosing between two kinds of disaster. At home, his government has to manage not only economics, but legitimacy. The accusation that he betrayed labor never disappears. It becomes a permanent shadow. In Parliament, opponents don't just argue with him. They question his right to speak for the working class at all. Outside, some former comrades treat him as a warning story. What happens when you compromise, when you go over, when you let fear of financial collapse override loyalty to the movement? Lyons responds the way he always has, by refusing to perform rage. He leans harder into steadiness. He becomes, in effect, the nation's reassurance salesman. But reassurance is exhausting when you don't fully believe it yourself. And the clock keeps ticking. The stress of office is relentless. The travel, the late nights, the endless decisions that can ruin lives with a signature. Lyons is not a man built for theatrical leadership. He is built for endurance. Yet endurance has limits, and his health is not an infinite resource. The public sees the Prime Minister's calm face. They do not see the private wear, the strain that accumulates like rust. Still, he fights for political survival, because his government is not automatically secure. The United Australia Party is a coalition of convenience, full of competing egos and old rivalries. Many of its members are former nationalists who have their own ideas about leadership. Lyons must keep them together while also keeping the country party close enough to govern. Every internal dispute threatens to reopen the question, is Lyons truly one of us, or just the man we're using until we find someone better? He cannot let them smell weakness, so he does what he has always done. He works, he negotiates, he absorbs pressure, and he keeps the machine moving. He becomes Prime Minister not as a conqueror, but as a human shock absorber, taking the impact so the system doesn't shatter. By the mid-1930s, the worst of the Depression begins to ease, but the political danger doesn't. Recovery is uneven and memory is long. Lyons must face elections with a record that can be read in two opposite ways. The man who steadied Australia, or the man who made the poor pay for stability. He knows that history will not be kind by default. It will be argued over, like everything else in his life. And just as the economic storm starts to clear, the international sky turns blacker. The next phase of his story will not be about whether Australia can balance its books. It will be about whether Australia can survive what's coming, and whether a man who built his power on calm can hold a nation steady when the world is preparing to explode. The first thing Lyons learns as Prime Minister is that calm is not a mood. It's a weapon. And in 1932, Australia is so frightened that a quiet voice can sound like salvation. But here's the contrast that should make your stomach tighten. While he's telling the country to hold steady, the country is watching. Men jump from windows overseas, watching breadlines at home, and watching their own government ask them to accept less. Less pay, less security, less hope, because the numbers demand it. Lyons has only one advantage. People believe he hates this pain as much as they do, and that belief is fragile. One wrong move, and Honest Joe becomes Judas Joe forever. He walks into office with a coalition that is not a family, but a truce. The United Australia Party is stitched together from old nationalists, business conservatives, and defectors like him. The Country Party hovers nearby, ready to bargain hard. Behind the smiles are knives. Men who think Lyons is temporary, useful, and replaceable. He can feel it in the room. Every time he speaks, he's being measured not just against labor, but against the ambitions sitting on his own benches. And outside Parliament, the crisis is not theoretical. Unemployment is still brutal. Relief work is humiliating. Families are living on tea and bread, stretching meals like elastic until it snaps. The Commonwealth's finances are tied to confidence. Confidence of lenders, of markets, of the public. Lyons' central bet is simple and terrifying. If Australia looks solvent and disciplined, money will keep flowing, trade will recover, jobs will return. If Australia looks reckless, the currency and credit could crack, and then the poor won't just suffer, they'll be crushed. So he governs like a man defusing a bomb with shaking hands. He sticks to the Premier's plan framework. Restraint, balanced budgets, gradual repair. It's not heroic, it's arithmetic. And arithmetic makes enemies. Labor calls him the man who made workers pay for a crisis they didn't cause. Some newspapers treat him like a traitor who put a suit on and forgot his roots. Yet Lyons keeps his tone mild, almost stubbornly mild, because he understands something about panic. If the leader panics, the country panics harder. He becomes the nation's steady metronome. Then comes the first twist that proves he's not merely a conservative puppet. He doesn't govern as a pure ideologue. He is cautious, yes, but he's also pragmatic in ways that irritate the hardliners who expected him to be their instrument. He supports measures to protect Australian industry, leans into tariffs and preference, and tries to keep social collapse from turning into political collapse. He's not building a new welfare state, but he's trying to stop the floorboards from giving way. The problem is that the floorboards are already cracked by something deeper than economics. Legitimacy. Lyons is prime minister, but half the country still sees him through the lens of betrayal. Every speech is haunted by the question, who are you really? A labor man who lost his nerve? Or a conservative in disguise who finally took the mask off? He answers with performance, carefully crafted ordinariness. The image of Lyons as the family man is not decoration, it's strategy. 12 children, a modest manner, a voice that doesn't thunder. In a decade of demagogues abroad, he sells the opposite. The anti-strongman strongman. He doesn't promise glory, he promises normal. And for a while, normal is exactly what Australia wants. By 1934, the political weather shifts. The economy shows signs of life, but the memory of hunger is still fresh. Lyons goes to the election needing to prove that his medicine wasn't just bitter, it worked. The campaign is a referendum on his gamble. Discipline first, recovery later. He wins again, but not with the comfort of a landslide. The result is a warning shot. The country is not in love with him. It is tolerating him because it fears the alternative. Inside his own ranks, tolerance is also the theme. The United Australia Party is full of men who think they could do the job better, louder, more decisively. Lyons survives by being indispensable, the one figure who can keep the coalition from tearing itself apart. He becomes less a commander than a hinge. If he breaks, the whole door comes off. And then the world starts to change shape. In Europe, Hitler is no longer a headline. He's a force. Germany rearms openly. Italy struts. Japan pushes outward in Asia. And Australians, still haunted by the First World War, begin to feel a different fear. Not hunger, but invasion, not unemployment, but war. Defense, once an abstract debate, becomes a question with a shadow behind it. Lyons is trapped between two clocks. One is the domestic clock. People want jobs, relief, stability now. The other is the international clock. Rearm now or pay later in blood. And rearmament is expensive. Every pound spent on ships and aircraft is a pound not spent on easing the Depression scars. He has to sell preparation to a country that is tired of sacrifice. He begins to increase defense spending, cautiously at first, then more seriously as the decade darkens. He supports steps to strengthen the Royal Australian Air Force and naval capacity, and he leans into the idea that Australia must be ready to contribute to imperial defense while also thinking about its own region. But he is not a natural war leader. He is a man who rose by promising calm, and now calm is being tested by events that do not care about his temperament. Another twist hits in 1935, and it's personal. Joseph Lyons becomes the first Australian Prime Minister to have a wife in the federal parliament. Enid Lyons enters the House of Representatives. It's a striking image, husband and wife in the national arena, yet it also sharpens the sense that politics has consumed the Lyons family entirely. Their home life is no longer a refuge. It's an extension of the battlefield. The public sees a wholesome partnership. The private reality is pressure layered on pressure. And pressure is where the time limit begins to bite. Lyons' health is not a rumor. It's a constraint. The job is grinding him down. Long travel, constant meetings, late nights, the endless need to keep factions aligned and crises contained. He is not a young man anymore, and the strain accumulates quietly, like water behind a dam. The country doesn't see the fatigue in the hotel rooms, the exhaustion after speeches, the way responsibility can hollow a person out. But the clock is ticking inside him, and he knows it. He can't say it out loud, because a prime minister who looks weak invites a coup from his own side. So he keeps going. In 1937, he faces the voters again. By now, the Depression's worst has eased, but the world is more dangerous than ever. Lyons campaigns as the guardian of stability in a time when stability is becoming rare. He wins a third term. It's an extraordinary political feat for a man who once walked out of his own party under a cloud of hatred. Yet the victory is not a celebration, it's a postponement. The problems are not solved. They are merely waiting, and the waiting ends fast. Europe lurches toward catastrophe. The Spanish Civil War rages as a preview of modern brutality. Germany absorbs Austria. Then comes Munich in 1938, appeasement dressed as peace. Lyons, like many leaders of the time, wants desperately to believe that negotiation can hold the line. Not because he's naive, but because he understands what war would mean for Australia. Casualties, debt, social fracture, and a generation marked again. He tries to keep Australia aligned with Britain, while also managing the reality that distance does not guarantee safety. He supports the idea of collective security, watches the League of Nations fail in slow motion, and faces the bitter truth that moral outrage does not stop armies. The world is being reorganized by force, and Australia is a small nation with a big coastline and limited options. At home, the political atmosphere hardens. The labor movement never stops calling him a defector. Conservatives never stop doubting his instincts. The Country Party bargains relentlessly. Cabinet tensions rise as defense demands grow. Lyons is constantly mediating between ministers, between parties, between the public's fear of war and its fear of sacrifice. And then, in the middle of this tightening vice, he makes a move that reveals how desperate the moment has become. He reshuffles. He negotiates. He tries to keep his government functional as personalities clash over the direction of defense and the economy. The coalition is fraying. The job is eating him alive. Yet he cannot step aside easily, because stepping aside would not simply be retirement. It would be surrendering control of the country. His course at the edge of war. The tension peaks in a way that feels almost cruelly cinematic. The man who built his power on steadiness is now surrounded by storms he cannot calm. The economy is no longer the only crisis. The world is, and his own body is becoming another front in the same war. He keeps showing up. He keeps speaking softly. He keeps trying to hold the center. Because if he lets go, if he falters, Australia doesn't just lose a prime minister. It loses the hinge that has been holding a fragile political machine together. And with war looming closer by the month, the question is no longer whether Lyons can win another election. It's whether he can last long enough to get Australia to the next day. If you want a clean ending, Joseph Lyons will not give you one. Here's the hook that flips the whole story on its head. The man who sold Australia calm as a survival tool is about to be destroyed by the very thing calm can't defeat, time inside his own chest. While Europe is loading rifles and signing pacts like death warrants, Australia's Prime Minister is running a government held together by his voice and a body that is quietly failing. The country thinks it has years. Lyons doesn't. By late 1938, the world is no longer threatening in theory. It's threatening in headlines that feel like drumbeats. Munich has happened. Peace declared with smiles that don't reach the eyes. Czechoslovakia is carved up. The League of Nations looks like a stage set after the actors have left. And in Canberra, Lyons is trying to do two impossible things at once. Prepare for war without admitting war is coming, and keep a coalition alive that is starting to behave like a pack. Because the real conflict in Lyons' final months isn't with labor. It isn't even with Hitler, not directly. It's with his own side. Men who smell the future and want to seize it. Men who think his caution is weakness. Men who believe Australia needs a harder fist and a louder voice. The United Australia Party is not a single creature. It's a cage full of ambitions. And the Country Party, always transactional, watches every crack in the bars. Defense becomes the fuse. Rearmament is no longer optional, but every decision is a political landmine. Spend too little and you look reckless. Spend too much and you look like you're dragging a weary nation towards slaughter. Lyons tries to thread the needle, expand the Royal Australian Air Force, strengthen naval capacity, build munitions capability, coordinate with Britain, yet also keep the budget and the public mood from collapsing into panic. He is still governing like a man defusing a bomb. Only now the bomb is global. Inside cabinet, the arguments sharpen into something personal. The most dangerous figure is not across the chamber. He's sitting near Lyons at the table. Robert Menzies, brilliant, ambitious, impatient. Menzies wants faster, bigger defense measures and a more assertive national posture. Lyons, shaped by depression politics and the fear of social fracture, moves more carefully. Their disagreement isn't just policy, it's temperament. Menzies is a rising storm, Lyons is a man trying to keep the windows from rattling. And then the twist that turns tension into crisis. Menzies resigns from cabinet in March 1939, publicly breaking with the government. Over defense and policy direction, it's a shockwave. Not because resignations never happen, but because this one announces, in plain language, that Lyons' authority is no longer unquestioned. The coalition can feel the ground shifting. The press smells blood. The opposition watches with the patience of people who know that governments don't always fall from elections. Sometimes they fall from exhaustion. Lyons tries to patch it. He reshuffles. He negotiates. He leans on relationships built over decades. But the truth is brutal. The thing holding the structure together has always been him. His ordinariness, his steadiness, his ability to make rivals pause before they strike. Remove that, and the whole machine starts to shake. And all the while, the time limit tightens. Lyons' health has been a shadow for years, but now it's a presence. The travel, the late nights, the constant pressure of keeping ministers aligned and the public reassured. This is not just tiring. It's corrosive. He is 59, but the job has aged him beyond the number. There are moments when the strain shows. The heaviness in his face, the fatigue that no amount of sleep seems to erase, the way his body seems to lag half a step behind his duty. Yet he cannot slow down. A prime minister who slows down invites replacement. A prime minister who admits weakness invites a stampede. So he does what he has always done. He keeps going, quietly, stubbornly, as if persistence itself can hold the line. In early 1939, the international situation turns from ominous to unmistakable. Germany moves again. The language of diplomacy becomes a thin veil over mobilization. In Australia, the question is no longer, will there be war? But how soon, and are we ready? Lyons is pulled toward decisions that will define the next decade. Conscription debates, industrial capacity, coordination with Britain. The balance between home defense and imperial commitments. Every choice has consequences that will outlive him. And then, in the middle of this, the most human detail of all becomes the most haunting. The Lyons household is still there, still enormous, still public. 12 children. A wife who has become a political figure in her own right. Enid Lyons is not merely the Prime Minister's wife. She is a member of Parliament, a symbol, a target, a partner. Their marriage has been turned into a national exhibit, admired, scrutinized, mythologized. People see the photograph, the family man, the gentle face, the domestic story. They don't see what it costs to carry a nation's fear home at night. Lyons' final weeks are a tightening spiral. Political fracture, global threat, physical decline. He is trying to keep the government functional after Menzies' resignation, trying to keep defense policy moving, trying to keep the coalition from turning into open warfare. He is also trying, in the simplest sense, to keep standing. Then comes April 1939. On 7th April, Joseph Lyons dies in office. Suddenly, shockingly, the hinge breaks. Australia wakes up to a fact that feels unreal. The man who has been the country's steady metronome through depression and into the shadow of war is gone before the war even begins. There is no long farewell tour, no graceful handover, no carefully staged transition. One day he is the prime minister. The next day the nation is staring at a vacancy at the worst possible moment. The political consequences are immediate and almost cinematic in their speed. The United Australia Party has to choose a path while the world is accelerating toward catastrophe. The coalition partner, the Country Party, refuses to serve under certain leaders. For a brief, strange moment, Earl Page becomes prime minister, an interlude that feels like the system catching its breath. Then the struggle for succession resolves the way ambition often does. Robert Menzies, the man who had just broken with Lyons, rises to take the leadership in the prime ministership. The storm takes the chair, and that is one of the sharpest ironies in Australian political history. Lyons spends years holding together a fragile coalition with his temperament, and the moment he is gone, the government's future is decided by the very forces he had been containing. His death doesn't just end a life. It changes the shape of the era, but the story doesn't end at the funeral, because Lyons leaves behind something rarer than policy, a political archetype. He had been a labor man who became the face of anti-labor government, a working-class Tasmanian who rose without the swagger of a conqueror, a prime minister who didn't sell charisma, but reassurance. In a decade when other countries were falling for strong men, Lyons offered the opposite image: quiet, domestic, almost stubbornly normal. That normal was not accidental. It was his shield and his weapon. It helped him win elections. It helped him keep a coalition from tearing itself apart. It helped him persuade a frightened public to accept painful economic discipline. And it helped him, for a time, keep Australia from swinging into extremes. His critics never stopped having ammunition. To many in labor, he remained the defector who helped enforce wage cuts and austerity during the Depression, a man who crossed the floor and never truly came back. To others, he was too cautious, too slow to grasp the scale of the coming war, too attached to the hope that negotiation could hold back a tide that was already breaking. Those arguments don't disappear with his death. They harden into legacy. Yet even his opponents had to admit something uncomfortable. Lyons had a political gift that can't be faked. People believed he meant what he said. They believed he felt the pain he asked them to endure. Honest Joe wasn't just a nickname. It was a relationship with the public. And in democratic politics, that kind of trust is a form of power. Enid Lyons carries the personal aftermath into the national story. Widowed suddenly, she becomes a living bridge to his memory, and her own career continues to break ground. She will later become the first woman in an Australian federal cabinet, proof that the Lyons legacy is not only about Joseph's choices, but about the political space their partnership helped open. The family that had been used as a symbol of stability now becomes a reminder of the cost of public life. And then the final unsettling contrast lands. Lyons dies before he has to lead Australia into the war he feared. He doesn't have to announce the declaration. He doesn't have to send the first waves of men. He doesn't have to watch casualty lists grow. History spares him that burden, but it also denies him the chance to be understood in that crucible. Instead, he becomes the Prime Minister of the threshold, the man who guided Australia from economic collapse toward recovery, and then stood at the edge of global catastrophe until his body gave out. So what do you do with a life like that? You remember that Joseph Lyons was not a mythic hero, not a roaring ideologue, not a man who tried to bend history with sheer force. He was something more unsettling and, in its own way, more dramatic. A politician whose greatest strength was restraint, whose greatest conflict was holding together a country and a coalition while the world came apart, and whose final enemy was not an election, not an opponent, but the ticking clock he could not negotiate with. And if you listen closely to the way his story ends, you can hear the real lesson hiding under the calm. Sometimes the person keeping everything from breaking is also the person most quietly breaking themselves.